I'm a guitar player and a singer and a songwriter. Background as a guitar player, mostly in jazz, but also been playing pop music and blues and country and soul and kind of whatever needs to be done as a professional guitar player. Had the opportunity to do it. The last few years I've been focusing on songwriting. As a member of Norah Jones' band, that's been a great opportunity. She recorded my song In the Morning on her Feels Like Home record, and that helped me blossom out into other people wanting to record my songs and co-write with me. And so for the last few years, that's been my main focus, has been on the songwriting aspect of things. But up until then, I've put myself out there, and people have known me mostly as a guitar player with jazz at the center and other things springing out from there. I was lucky. Musicians that I meet seem to come from either being very self-educated or from a proper education in a school. And I got the best of both worlds. The school that I went to is called the Dick Grove School of Music in Los Angeles. And they've since closed their doors. I think you can still buy their books online. But that was a great place for me. I studied guitar, went through the guitar program there, and then went back for another program, composing and arranging. So I learned how to write for orchestra and big band, and that was great. Every week I got up in front of a big band or a small string orchestra and conducted a new piece of music, and that was incredible training because it taught me to be able to write music quickly on a deadline, and also to have the nerve to stand up in front of 20 or 30 musicians and say, okay, here it is, I'm going to count it off and we go. And you'd have one or two takes, and then you'd have to get off the stand because you'd have the next student up behind you. So that was a great opportunity. But also, my grandfather was a musician. He worked in the studios in Hollywood and Burbank, and so I got a lot of just practical training from going to recording sessions with him and TV pre-records with him, and just seeing what it really looked like to be a working musician for studio players. And I had an eye more towards that than towards wanting to be like a rock and roll. I didn't want to be necessarily in a rock band or anything. I thought going to work as a musician was like getting up early and putting on a suit and tie and reading music off a music stand. I didn't know there was a whole other side to it.
Who's your grandfather?
His name was George Weil, and not a super famous guy, but he worked in NBC for a long time. He was the musical director on the Flip Wilson TV show and on the Andy Williams show. He wrote two pieces of music that everybody knows. He wrote the Gilligan's Island theme song, which is pretty cool claim to fame, and he also wrote a Christmas song that Andy Williams sang called It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year. And then a lot of other songs that people don't know, but those were sort of his big hits. Some writers have a schedule. They wake up in the morning and they say, 9 to 12 is my writing time. And other writers say, I just wait for, the feeling to come through the air, and when the vibration is right, it'll hit me and I'll write it down. And it's sort of like capturing butterflies or something versus breeding butterflies in a laboratory. And my grandfather did both of those things. Working in television, he had a lot of tight deadlines. He'd go to a meeting on Monday morning and they'd say, George, we need you to write this. Ella Fitzgerald's going to be the guest on the show. We need you to write this. We need this. Here's the size of the band. We'll see you Thursday. And he'd have to go home and either write it all himself or delegate, somebody else to write it for him. But at the same time, in all his spare time, he was always writing music. He'd write a whole bunch of things for a sax quartet. Without even having a sax quartet to play them, he would just always be writing, or he'd write something for solo violin. So for him, there was always the work music and then the music that just came to him in projects. And that's the way that I write. So I was inspired by him that when there's a deadline to meet, I can meet it. And also, I'm always got my feelers out for what's inside and what's in the air, and trying to bring those together. Rather than having a weekly routine where I know, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday I do this in these hours and this in these hours, I really wake up every day and start from scratch, and I make a to-do list. And some days the to-do list is finish this song. Some days the to-do list has more businessy stuff, whether it's sending emails to my publisher or sending out emails to people locally about gigs I'm doing, or even booking a tour. You know, I might spend a whole week putting together a tour that's coming up, booking the flights, booking the shows, hiring bands in different cities, things like that. So from week to week, those needs change, and I sort of have to adjust how much of it's business, how much of it's creative, and occasionally I take writing retreats where I'll just go somewhere for a week and just write. If I find that I'm not getting enough writing done and spending too much time on, you know, the business stuff, I'll just set aside a week and just go disappear and write music for a week. I got my publishing deal through having that song on Norah Jones' record. My song "In the Morning" is on her second record, which is called "Feels Like Home." And up until that point, publishers weren't all that interested in what I was writing. I was just some guy writing songs. And then when it looked like I was going to have a song on this record, and when it, you know, they expected Norah's second record to sell in the millions, a lot of publishers wanted a piece of my publishing, because that's real, you know, that's real money. So a few people had the most interest, and Universal basically just made me the best offer, and it's been great for me to have that opportunity. I mean, for one thing, it's made me some money, but for another thing, it's put me in a position to write with other people. You know, other people in the Universal pen. It's just easy to connect with people that way. It's been a great network. I have what's called a co-publishing deal. There's different kinds of publishing deals. You can make arrangements for a publishing company to work with some of your catalog. Some people have deals with just their one song. If you've got one hit, like the song that I had on Norah's record, I could have potentially made a deal for just that one song and kept all the rest of my publishing to myself. What I did was I worked with my whole catalog, which was things I'd written up until that point, and things that I'll write in the future. And it's a co-publishing arrangement, so it's a 75 to me, 25 to them split. And I got an advance. It's another kind of thing that you can arrange. A lot of writers in Nashville get an annual draw. Those people who are cranking out songs and songs and songs, it becomes more of a job for them, and you negotiate a publishing deal wherein the publisher will pay you an annual draw, and then they have to recoup that. Otherwise, you know, your next year comes down a bit, and they adjust that. The idea is they have a sense, more or less, of how much money you bring in as a writer every year, and they average that out, and they just pay it to you every year. And that's a pretty cool deal. I went a different way. They looked at me and they said, well, you know, we think this song's going to perform this way. You know, we think the rest of your catalog we could exploit it. Before I got a publishing deal, I always thought exploit was a bad word. But in the publishing world, when they say exploit, what they mean is we're going to take your songs and try and get them out there, get them into films and TV, get them into for other people to sing them. So that's exploiting in a way that benefits the writer and the publisher. So they gave me a large advance, and then it's really on them to make the money back by exploiting the songs. So for me, it worked out to be a good situation, because I had the leverage. They said, okay, we're going to give you, I really can't say what the number was, but it was more zeros than I'd seen on a check before. So they gave me that money, and then it's really on them, if they want to make that money back, to exploit the songs. Another aspect of the business is that I've had things licensed off of my records for movies, but it wasn't a song that I wrote. I made a record a few years ago in Memphis that was a Memphis-themed record, and there was a cover of "Love Me Tender" on it. Elvis Presley and the Memphis, that was sort of the connection, is that I had recorded "Love Me Tender" on it. And that recording, which featured Norah Jones and a bunch of local Memphis, I recorded the music in Memphis, and then Norah overdubbed the vocal afterwards in New York. That was licensed for Princess Diaries 2. And because it was on my own record label, I own the mechanical rights to that recording. The Disney company had to write a very big check to use my recording in their movie. but I wasn't the songwriter of Love Me Tender. I wish I was the songwriter of Love Me Tender. So that was used in a movie, and that was really nice to just to at least hear my arrangement and my guitar playing in that movie. But so far, my songs per se haven't been used in movies or television, but other people have recorded my songs, and that's been nice too. There's a new artist named Eran James, Eran, out of Australia, who just recorded a song I wrote, and it's the first song on his new record, and they're really pushing it. It's a super pop kind of record, and he did get a song in the new Shrek movie, so I have a feeling that that could do well. I'll let like a month go by and let them do their thing. I don't call them every day. I send them a lot of postcards from my travels on the road, which is sort of just my simple way of reminding them that I'm around. But I try to have face meetings with them whenever I can. When I'm in Los Angeles, I go to the LA office of Universal and say hi, go out to lunch, talk about things. When I'm in Nashville, I meet with them, as I did a couple weeks ago. Funny enough, living in New York, I have the least actual relationship with people in the New York office, but that's partly because they had some turnover there, and the people that I had been dealing with weren't. Their office was in a little bit of upheaval. Upheaval. I don't know, as you like. But that's really important. I'd say that's an area where people should do as I say more than do as I do. You need to get up in their face. It's sort of a funny relationship. Even though the ball's in their court, like they're out the money. When in a record deal, if a record company gives you an advance, and your record doesn't sell that well for whatever reason, you really are on the hook for that money. Record companies expect that money back some way or another. They're probably not going to come take your couch out of your living room, but they expect that money. Publishing deals are a little bit softer in that if you get a publishing advance and they don't recoup, they're certainly not going to give you any more money unless you're really slick. But they're not going to want to give you more money, but they might let it go. Maybe they'll want you to buy back. There's different things, but this is a little bit of a long-winded answer here. The idea is if they give you money and you've got the songs, it's on them to earn the money. Otherwise, they're out the money. But you still have to nudge them. You still have to nudge them all the time, because a big company like Universal or EMI or any of the big companies like that, their stable of writers is huge. And in my particular case, Universal has another writer named Adam Levy. So it's very confusing. So I need to take extra care to make sure that they know, hey, I've got this new song on this Eran James record. They didn't get it there for me. I got it there myself. But the big idea is that the publishers should be doing that for you. They should say, hey, so-and-so is making a new record. Do you got anything in this style? Whoever the artist is, whether it's a young artist or an established artist. That's really the big idea, is that they're supposed to be looking for opportunities for your songs. But what I found is that as a songwriter, as a performer, you have to make the opportunities yourself, and then sort of let them feel like they took the credit, let them take the credit so that they feel like, oh yeah, we got you this song here. It's just part of doing business. But the short answer to your question is, kids, yes. If you have a publishing deal and somebody gives you some money, don't wait for them to exploit your songs and make the money back. Push them. Create opportunities. And sometimes you create an opportunity and then at the last minute you can hand it over to them and say, hey, just make this call and this will happen. It's sort of the politics of business. People always like to feel like they're the ones who've done the thing for you. And whether they have or not, at the end of the day, if the money's made, I guess it doesn't matter so much. I do two different kinds of writing. I write on my own, and then about half the time I'll write with a partner, a co-writing partner. And the co-writes tend to be more geared that way to writing for particular artists. Either myself or the co-writer will have a publishing deal, and they'll hear through the grapevine that I don't know, Dionne Warwick, I'll say, is looking for X kind of song, or Aerosmith is looking for Y kind of song. And so I've written those, and it's a lot of fun because you get into character. I find when I'm writing for myself, they tend to be more personal songs. You know, I'm writing in my own songs. When I say she, I know who she is because there's a she in my life, and they're written about a specific she. And when I say I really mean me. Whereas in co-writing songs, the I's and the he's and the she's and the they's and the you's tend to be more general because, like I wrote a song last year for Aerosmith. They didn't pick it up, I'm sorry to say, but I had to think about, would Steven Tyler be comfortable? Could you really picture Steven Tyler singing this? And you have to think that way when you're writing for another artist. Not only can you imagine their voice, as a songwriter, you are on the artsy fartsy side of things. The first idea is, hey, could you hear this person's voice with the song? But the reality of the pop music market is much more, would Steven Tyler say this or that? Would Alan Jackson say this or that? And especially in Nashville, where I wrote this song for Aerosmith, because somebody at the publishing company is going to say, or somebody at Steven Tyler's management company or whoever, and I don't mean to pick on Steven Tyler. I'm just talking about a real situation. The people around the artist know, whoa, they're not going to sing that. That's the thing. A friend of mine, we wrote a song for Bonnie Raitt to sing, and it was the same kind of consideration. He had worked with her before, and he said, look, these are the kind of stories that she's going to want to tell, and these are the kind of stories she's not going to want to tell. And even if you have a song that's a hit in your mind, if you know, wow, this is a hit, you have to think about the artist in that way. Artists have certain kinds of stories that they want to tell. So when I'm writing for myself, I don't think about those things. I tell all kinds of stories. Some have happy endings, some don't. Some are. I started to write a song last week, visiting a friend in Austin, and the song is called "Nothing to Write Home About." And the idea for the song is that this guy he starts talking about, I went to this diner and it's really cool, and the food comes slow, but the smiles come quick, and it's an out of the way place, and nobody bothers you, but it's nothing to write home about. And then in the second verse, he reveals that he's maybe got something going on with one of the waitresses, but it's nothing to write home about. And then in the third verse, or in the middle eight, it would be revealed that the reason it's nothing to write home about is because he's got somebody at home. And he's not going to write home about the diner or the waitress because somebody's at home waiting for him. And my friend who I was writing with said, whoa, I can't write that, because he's happily married and has a kid. And he said, who's going to sing that? Who's going to sing a song that says, hey, honey, I'm cheating, miss you, wish you were here. And I don't mind singing those kind of songs. I'm not cheating, but I think, somebody like Randy Newman is an interesting case where he writes all kinds of songs, and if you really believe that he's the guy in those songs, you would think he's an awful person. But for him, it's just characters, and I like that. It tends to happen all at once, and if anything, I'd say the words come first. And people might be surprised because my background is in music, and I've really only been a songwriter for, maybe a quarter of the time that I've been a musician overall, or not even that. But the words are so important. I almost feel like it would be easier for me to set a poem. If somebody just gave me a poem and said, hey, can you put some music to this? That's easier for me than to start with an instrumental piece and try and write lyrics to it. That, to me, is tricky business. I think the words have to... It's hard to do that without making it sound forced, whereas I feel like if a poem makes sense as a poem, then there's already lyric currents in it, whether the poet thought about it that way or not. Whereas music doesn't automatically have lyrical currents. You know, if you listen to Chopin preludes or something like that, I wouldn't want to write words to them. They just exist as music, you know. Coming from a jazz background, when I first started to write songs, I took an approach the same that I had as a jazz guitar player, which was transcribing. So I'd sit there with my headphones on and I'd listen to, rather than opening up the booklet that came with the CD and looking at the lyrics, or rather than going out and buying the song folio and, oh wow, they said that? Okay. I would sit with headphones and just write out the lyrics from scratch, which sometimes resulted in mishearings of things, like, especially with Bob Dylan, you might think the lyric is one thing and it's another. There's a song called What's a Sweetheart Like You? It's from the record Infidels. There's a line, I'm still not sure what the line is, but he's talking about an ex of his, and he says, I think he says, she wanted to hold me, not just to have. But somebody else told me, no, she wanted the whole me, not just a half. But I thought it was a play off of, like, when you get married to somebody, you know, to have and to hold. She wanted to hold me, not just to have. But maybe it is whole. I don't know if it's whole and half. But anyway, but I did a lot of transcribing. I just had notebooks full of Bob Dylan songs, Tom Waits songs, Neil Young songs, Elvis Costello songs. And to me, that was a great way to learn, writing it out. There's some part of your brain that gets used when you're actually listening and writing it down, rather than just opening up a book and reading it. Sure, you can go to the bookstore and buy the collected lyrics of Bob Dylan and study it, sure. But if you write it out yourself, it taps into a different part of your brain, and then you can study it. And I would study the meter of it, the poetic meter, the rhyming scheme, and sometimes I would actually write songs that were modeled on other people's songs. There's a song of mine called Longest Day of the Year that's modeled on a Neil Young song called Birds. And I just looked at the rhythm of the song, pretended that I couldn't speak a word of English, and just listened to it as rhythm and where the accents were. And I plugged in new words, changed the chords, changed the melody, and all of a sudden it's not Birds anymore. And it's the same technique I'd done studying jazz when I was trying to write my own tunes. I would take a standard, I'd reharmonize it, you know, put new chords to an old Gershwin tune or Irving Berlin song, and then try and write a melody that fit the new chords, and then maybe do a little bit of adjusting here and there, and then all of a sudden you've got a new tune that doesn't anymore sound like I guess it'd be like putting tracing paper over the Mona Lisa, and then, you know, changing the background setting and changing her face into a man or something. And if you did it enough, it wouldn't be the Mona Lisa anymore. And I think that's what artists have been doing for centuries. So I think that's a great way to learn. You know, it's also great to just lock yourself in a room and find what's inside yourself. And ultimately, you have to figure out what's inside your own songwriting self. But when you're learning, just as in jazz or in any other style, the best thing you can do is transcribe what other people have done, and then look at the rhyme scheme and study it, and try and use those as models, because they work. You know, if you start from scratch, you're not necessarily using a model that works. But if a song is on a Neil Young record or a Bob Dylan record, it works. You know, it's that somebody's already done the testing and the research, and you're using their research to model your own song. Yeah, I love the Great American Songbook, and that's another thing that came from my grandfather. When I was a teenager and first really getting deep into music, my grandfather, who was a professional arranger, professional piano player, songwriter, he emphasized those songs as songs to learn, because to him, those were pop songs. Like, I hadn't yet got into jazz education where people use Gershwin songs as a vehicle for improvisation. I was too young to really be aware of that. So my first interaction with Gershwin and Cole Porter were just as songs. And my grandfather really steered me in that direction. And I wanted to play with him. He was the best musician that I knew. And it's always good to play with musicians who are better than you. So here's a guy that was 50 years better than me. And so just to be able to jam with him, since he wasn't really going to learn the popular songs of my day. I had to learn the popular songs of his day, and those were the songs. He loved Irving Berlin. And so I learned all those songs when I was a teenager, which didn't get me anywhere in school. Nobody in my high school was that interested in playing those tunes. But I studied the harmony of them. I studied the structure of them, the rhyming scheme. And if there was improvisation at all, it was really just 8 bars here, 16 bars there. Because in my grandfather's idea of jazz, his idea of jazz is pre-bebop, like Charlie Parker didn't make any sense to him at all. But if you listen to the early records, Ben Webster would come in and play 8 bars or 16 bars, and that would be it, or a hot chorus. So it was really, the focus was the song, what could you do with the melody? And even the improvisations were based more on the melody than on, harmonic substitution. So he really stressed that a lot, and because of that, I think I know probably more show tunes than probably anybody my age when I was a kid, and even maybe now it doesn't seem like those tunes are as widely played. But I love it when somebody calls me out of the blue and says, hey, I'm playing a jazz gig, I need an accompanist. Could you just play guitar for me? And you show up and they don't have a book of tunes, they just say, oh yeah, I do Loverman in B flat. Cool, no problem. I love those kind of gigs. I studied those songs, and it's a great opportunity now to still be able to play them. It is really different being a session player, being a sideman, being a leader. Very different hats. Being a session player, and by that I mean working in studios, and particularly working with people that you don't necessarily know so well. So you just come in, you hear the track, and you have to make music happen. Things have to happen very quickly. To be a session player, there's not a lot of time to scratch your head or wait for inspiration, like what we were talking about with songwriting. If you're a session player, you can't sit there and wait for some good idea to come. You have to learn to generate ideas. It's a certain way of thinking. And or if somebody else has an idea and they say, I need you to do this, then you do that. And those are the best kind of sessions, when there's a mix of somebody has a very clear idea of what they want, and at the same time, they've hired you because there's something particular that you do that nobody else is going to be able to do. Those sessions aren't as common as I wish they were. I mean, most of the time, somebody calls you for a session, they may not know exactly what they want. They got your number from somebody, they don't know what you do. And then those are the times when you have to step up a little bit and say, okay, look, here's the idea, I'm going to put it out there. But I've been fortunate in that most of the sessions I have done, especially of late, people have heard me on some other record, they have an idea of what I do, and they want me to bring that particular thing to it. But it's the utmost place for a musician to have a professional attitude of show up early, make sure your guitar is in good working order, make sure everything you have is in good working order. I mean, these things should be really obvious, but I see people make the same mistakes. Show up to a recording session with equipment that doesn't work, or they don't bring any equipment and they figure, well, it'll all be there. Like, you need to work that out in advance. Sessions happen in this little window of time, and there's a lot of people counting on some magic to happen in that little window of time. And the more you can stack the deck by showing up early, having equipment that works, trying to get yourself a little bit familiar with what the artist does and what they're going to want to do. You're stacking the deck so that when you show up, it's a lot easier to just put on your guitar, tune it up, and roll tape, please. And that's how it should go. So I approach that with the most professional kind of work ethic. And that, again, partly comes from my grandfather, because he'd show up at recording sessions 2 hours in advance. I never understood why, and then I figured it out when I started to do it myself. Well, I think what I bring to sessions that somebody else might not is that all the years of playing jazz and being an improviser, I feel like my inner radio, as it were, can tune in a lot of different stations, as far as like all the different things that are floating in the air. A good session player, they can not only get all the stations of all the different wavelengths. I hope this isn't too cosmic sounding, but that's what you're doing. Like, I think of music as receiving stuff and then channeling it out through whatever your instrument is. And having been a jazz player and an improviser, and having been in a lot of situations where you show up and you really don't know what's going to happen. There's a band and they say, okay, here, just listen, just listen. And my inner radio has not only the big commercial stations, but has all the little in-between stations and the Tejano station and the public radio station, all the little in-between stations. And so I can hear all those things and then hopefully make a good decision about which is the best one for the actual song that's happening right there. Also, because of my education, having gone through school where I can read music, if somebody actually puts, it's very rare these days, but if somebody were actually to put a chart in front of me with written music and a tempo marking and dynamics written in and articulations, I can read all that. But if somebody comes in and they've got written on a piece of, legal pad paper, a Nashville chart with just numbers, 1, 6, 4, 5, whatever, I can read that. Or if somebody says, I can't write music, just listen and we'll do it, I can do that. I think for a young person wanting to be able to work in recording environments, you need all of those tools. You need ears, you need eyes, and you have to be able to react quickly. And the other thing is to not be too precious about it all in the end. And that once you put something down, if it feels good, you move on. And you don't go, especially for somebody else's session, you don't say, wait, well, I need to plug in, wait, let me punch me in there. Do the best work you can and then let it go. And that's another thing I got from my grandfather. Oh, the more I think about it, the more he really helped me a lot. He worked in TV, and they would do 1 take, 2 if they had to. If something really catastrophic happened, if an I-beam fell down and, smashed the drums, they'd do another take. But at the end of the day, that felt good. Yeah, that's cool. And then later, if the singer wants to go back and do 20,000 takes with their vocal, that's fine. It's their record. They can do that. But as a sideman, that's not what you're there for. You're there to be good, do your best work, say thanks a lot, and go home. In Norah Jones' band, in the Handsome Band, well, that's a good mix of what I was talking about. I was asked to join that band because Norah already knew what my skill set was. So it wasn't I didn't just go down to the music union hall one day and there was a note on the bulletin board, guitarist wanted for 5-piece pop band, please inquire. Norah was familiar with my guitar playing. I'd actually hired her for some gigs when she first moved to New York to just play piano in my own band. So she had a real good sense of where my strengths were. And that made it easy for me to function in that band because I could just be myself. Not every situation is like that. Friends of mine get asked to join touring bands and they're asked to do all kinds of things that aren't to their strengths. And lucky me, I got hired by somebody who actually knows what I've done, had heard my records, had heard my guitar playing, had seen me around New York, and basically just said, that's what I want, do that. And then occasionally would sort of dial it in a little bit. Hey, do that thing you do, but maybe put this spin on it or put that spin on it. And then, lucky for me, she also challenged me to do things that were out of my comfort zone. When I joined her band, when I joined Norah's band, I remember saying to her, I play electric guitar. That's what I do. But if you need a background singer, I can't really do that. And I don't play acoustic guitar. I don't own one, and that's not really what I do. So I'll play all the electric guitar you want. Whatever you say, I'm game. And she said, "Great, you're hired." Because on the record, on the "Come Away With Me" record, somebody else had played all the acoustic. A guy named Jesse Harris, who also wrote some of those songs. He wrote "Don't Know Why." But touring, Norah can only take one guitar player out. I'm sort of telling this story in a little bit of an elliptical way. But when the first record was done, and she said, "Great, record's done. Let's go on the road." She couldn't take 6 or 7 people on the road. No starting artist can afford to do that. So she pared the band down to herself on piano, Lee Alexander, her boyfriend, on bass, and me on guitar. And I suddenly had to not only play all the electric stuff, but play all the acoustic stuff that Jesse Harris had played on the record. And she said, "Well, I know you don't really want to play acoustic, but if you want to go on tour, could you do this?" And one thing I did get from my grandfather was always say yes and then figure it out later. If somebody says, "Hey, can you write for a brass quintet?" You say yes, and then you go home or you go to the library and you figure out how it's done, and by next Friday you've got your thing done. So I said, "Yeah, sure, I can play acoustic guitar," and I went out and borrowed one and then bought one. And all along the way, she kept doing that. She'd say, "Well, I know you don't really sing backup, but if you could just sing this one line, it would really help the show." Okay. And then it was, even with songwriting, we were on our first tour in 2002, and she said, "Gosh, these songs from the first record, I'm already kind of tired of them because I've been doing them for 2 or 3 years before we recorded them. Anyone got any songs?" And so I said, "Yeah, I got a song." I went in the back lounge and I wrote a song, which was In the Morning, which she wound up recording. And she recorded actually another one of my songs. It didn't make it onto the record, but we recorded it in the studio and we did it live quite a bit. So as a sideman, you have to know what your strengths are and always play to your strengths, like whatever they are. Put those first, but then when somebody challenges you, it's always an opportunity. That's how my grandfather learned. He didn't know anything about arranging when he started working in radio in the 40s. But, the boss would say, "Hey, can you write for strings?" And he'd say, "Yeah, sure." So that's a good thing to have, and then you figure it out. So working as a sideman, it has all the stuff I said about being a session person. You still have to be responsible and on time and have equipment that works. But you also have to be willing to grow, and there's time to put your foot down, but it actually winds up being pretty rare. If somebody said, "Can you play acoustic guitar and sing backup and write a song and jump off a cliff?" I'd probably say no. I'd definitely say no. But shy of that, it's another growth opportunity. And what else as a musician, if you're not in school anymore and you're playing professionally, the opportunity for growth, the gig is the opportunity for the growth. Yeah, the social thing of being a good touring musician, you live on a bus, so it's like living in a 500 square foot apartment with 8 roommates. It might make a good MTV reality show, but the actual mechanics of it are quite tricky. So, that's as important as anything else. When I talk to young musicians is, be the best you can. If that means practicing 8 hours a day, do that. If that means practicing however many hours, do that. Get good. Be the best you can be. But if you don't have people skills, if you don't have the social skills, then your career will be very short-lived. I know lots of musicians who don't tour, and it's because people don't think of them, like band leaders don't think of them as somebody that they'd want to spend that many hours in a bus with, or at a more basic level in a van with, because most touring, unless you're with Norah Jones or some big pop star, the reality is you're probably going to be in a 15-passenger van driving 6-8 hours a day. And I think about that too. As a band leader, I work on both sides of that. I'm a band leader and I'm also a sideman. For Norah, I'm a sideman. With my own music, I'm a band leader. And when I think about going on the road, the list of my favorite musicians is pretty long. And then when I think about people I'd want to be in a van with for 8-10 hours a day, the list gets a lot shorter. So I don't know exactly what you can do to be one of those people who other people would want to spend time around, but I guess that's different for everybody. But some of it's the professional stuff, be on time. Some of it's hygienic stuff, bathe regularly, brush your teeth, things like that. Part of it is just being willing to roll with the punches, because good vibes are infectious, and people want to be around that, and bad vibes are infectious. When you're in a tiny little environment, if you're having a bad day, a grumpy day, you make it difficult for everybody else. So that's something that I've learned a lot over the last 7-8 years of traveling with Norah, is to be flexible and be easygoing, and that makes the tour go a lot faster that way. As with my career overall, being a band leader has been divided sort of down two lines. I've made several jazz records, instrumental jazz records, featuring my guitar playing and featuring original compositions. I always feature original compositions, whether I'm singing or playing. But the instrumental records have tended to be jazzier. I made a record a few years ago with Larry Goldings on organ and Kenny Wollesen on drums, called Buttermilk Channel, and that was my model then for. I love playing in an organ trio format. I think for a guitar player, it's just the best because things can be really open or they can be really full. I always have emphasized in my records original compositions. You know, I've never wanted to make a record of Irving Berlin songs or Cole Porter songs, though I love them. I just figured that people have been making records of those songs for years and years, and a record is a special event. For me, if I'm going to spend the time, the money, the energy, and gather a bunch of people around a special event, for me the special event is some new music and some special people in a room and see what happens. Not to put down somebody else who wants to make a standard record, but that's just never what it's been. That's never been interesting for me. So I use records as kind of, the way I make records typically is I think of who I want to play with, I set a recording date, and then I work backwards from there with music. If today's the end of September, I say, Christmas Day, I want to make a record with these people. I make sure they're going to be in town, which is difficult because the better musicians that you want to play with, to get any one of them in one room at one time is hard, and then it gets exponentially more difficult to get your 3 favorite musicians in one room at one time. So then I just write music for those people. That seems like a kind of a no-brainer. So I've done that, and then I started to focus more on my own songwriting just in the last few years. Before that, I wouldn't have thought of singing on a record. I made a record in Memphis a few years ago called Get Your Glow On, and it's mostly instrumental. It's a sort of a Memphis-themed record. It's kind of a Booker T, soul journey kind of record, but I had some vocals on it. And for vocals, I hired professionals. I had the Holmes brothers sang on a track. Norah Jones sang on a track. Otis Clay sang on a track. And I thought that was the better idea. Get real singers in. And that was a good decision then, but now I'm more focused on singing. So the last 2 records that I've actually released are vocal records. One is called Loose Rhymes, and the newer one is called Washing Day. And I guess I approached them more or less the same as I did with the instrumental records. It's just that when I was making instrumental records, the guitar was the voice. And now my voice is the voice, but the guitar is still the voice. So on a good day, I'm probably Sam and Dave at the same time, or I think of somebody like B.B. King, who is a solo, he's just a singer, but his guitar is part of the equation too, or Chuck Berry, or Jimi Hendrix, or any number of people who integrate the guitar. Jimi Hendrix could have made an instrumental record, and I'd love to hear it if he did. B.B. King could make an instrumental record. I think he's recorded 1 or 2 instrumental sides that I'm aware of in his career, and it's fantastic. He really can make his guitar talk. But as far as how I approach it as a leader, all the things that I've learned as a sideman, I just flip in reverse as a leader, because I'm always looking at the people that I hire as, I've spent a lot more time in their shoes, than being a leader. Spent a lot more time in recording sessions waiting for somebody to say, hey, here's what we're going to do, than being the guy who says, here's what we're going to do. So I try, and when I say things to the band, well, for one thing, I try and hire the right people in the first place. I hire people who I know what they do. I'm not going to get people in a room and then try and ask them to do impossible, uncomfortable things. You hire the right people for what your vision is, and then you just adjust a little bit, wellness and taking care of yourself. When you're a student, it might be something you take for granted, because somebody who's 18, 20, 25, your body is still pretty forgiving of, you can get away with not taking such good care of yourself and still bounce back. But if you want to have a lifetime of playing music, you have to take care of your body. I've just seen it over and over and over. Musicians get into their 50s and 60s and things, or their 40s even sometimes, and things start to break down. And I've been fortunate, knock wood, that I haven't had any serious problems. I had a shoulder neck thing about 10 years ago that I thought might mean I was going to have to spend the rest of my life playing guitar sitting down, because right where the strap goes over, it was a place of such pain that I just couldn't wear a guitar strap anymore. So I thought, well, okay, I'll play sitting down. And then I thought, well, no, that's no good. I've got to come up with a better solution than that. So what I did was I studied something called Alexander technique, which is a thing that's been around for maybe 100 years. That's just learning how to use your body differently to do basic day-to-day things. It's not physical therapy in the sense of having strengthening exercises or a regimen like that. It's just a way of rethinking really basic stuff. How do you sit in a chair? How do you stand up? How do you sit down? How do you walk across the room? And then how do you play your instrument? That combined with using a different kind of strap, a wider strap. I got through that particular thing, and now I can play guitar standing or sitting or however. But it was just something I didn't see coming, and it had come from playing a lot in intense situations, and probably my whole life had been playing the guitar. I was playing guitar 8-10 hours a day and drinking a lot of coffee and playing guitar, and I just kind of got all amped up. And since then I've dabbled in different things. I still don't have one routine, but 2 years ago I decided I wanted to start running. So I started running, I trained, I ran a marathon. It was awesome. But that had, I think, as much to do with goal setting and accomplishing something outside of music as it did with health and wellness. As in the business part of things or the musical side of things, everybody has to find their own thing. I wouldn't advocate that everybody do yoga or everybody do kung fu or everybody take a Pilates class or whatever. Everybody has to find their own thing, but whatever it is, start now. It's like brushing your teeth. My grandmother used to say, always be true to your teeth or they'll be false to you. And I think it's the same with your whole body. The more you can do when you're young and get into good habits of wellness, the longer your life as a musician will be. And so find something that excites you, that feels good, whatever it is. My knee has gone bad, so running is not going to be the thing for me anymore. But just really basic stuff. It sounds so simple, I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but get a good night's sleep. Yeah, it's cool to be up all night playing music or listening to music or whatever, but that's your body's one chance to recover, and you have that chance every day. Drink a lot of water. Water just helps it helps your whole system. And if you like to take a drink, but do it in moderation. But the big picture, if you're gonna go on tour, like I have for the last 7 years, is do everything you can to take care of yourself, because that's the one thing that's really not the band leader's responsibility. When I'm on tour with Norah Jones, I don't expect her to lead yoga classes every morning or I don't expect her to, like, buy me a jogging suit or, anything like that. Everybody has to take that responsibility for themselves. And not only is it good if you want your body to last a long time, but even on tour, I found that when I was exercising a lot on tour, my head was a lot clearer. It's not just that, I burned a few calories, I lost a few pounds, I looked, healthier. I felt healthier, and my head was really clear. So that when you do get into those intense situations where, somebody's having a bad day or 5 people are having a bad day, you have a really different perspective if you exercise a lot and do something that gets you breathing and sweating every day. So it's not just that, your hands and, all your musical stuff will last longer. It's just that you have a healthier perspective. As far as my voice, I haven't sorted that one out yet. I've only been singing, a fraction of the time that I've been a guitar player. So I don't have personally really a good regimen for that. But the singers that I know who do, they warm up, they take classes. Like, I've only had one singing class, so I'm probably doing it all wrong for all I know. So that's another case of do as I say, not as I do. I hope I have a voice in 5 years and in 50 years. I suck on a lot of Ricola to keep it well lubed. That's my best thing, and water. I don't have a manager. I have a publicist, and she helps me with a lot of things that a manager might do in the absence of having a manager. I set aside a few hours a day for business. Well, I don't always set them aside. They just seem to happen. I set aside 5 minutes for business, and then 2 hours later, I'm still doing it. To-do lists are really helpful. Instead of just sitting down and saying, well, I'm going to get on the computer and, do this or that businessy stuff. If you have a list, just time management is basically what I'm trying to emphasize. But to get to your question about having a manager, I don't have a manager, and I'd like to have a manager. There's sort of I find a hard thing to come by, because there's a paradox. Managers work on commission. They take a percentage of what you're earning. And most artists in a certain point in their career aren't earning that much, and in the early phases especially. And so a manager might not be that interested until you're at a point where you're already able to generate enough money on your own, at which case you might say, well, why do I need a manager now? I'm already making money. And that's just the point where a manager might get interested, because they want to make a piece of that money. So in the best case scenario, a manager can help find a lot of more opportunities for you. For every opportunity you can find for yourself, hopefully the manager has been in the business enough years to just have a lot of contact and have a broader perspective. If I have a fault, it's probably that I look at today and tomorrow and next week, when I should be looking at next year and 3 years down the line and 5 years down the line. And a good manager can help you do that. But what I do in my businessy stuff is I don't have a booking agent. So I'll spend a few hours a day booking a tour, and all the stuff that comes with it, booking the flights, booking the hotels, all that kind of stuff. And even advancing the shows, which means calling the production manager at the club and saying, I need this kind of amplifier. I need, you have a plot of what your stage setup is. Here's where the drums are, here's where the guitar amps are, here's where the vocal mics are. You have that ready to go, and you fax that to the club and you say, I need this. Oh, you don't have that? Okay, let's work that out. So there's a lot of businessy stuff that I do that just has to do with real production-oriented things. I'm not out looking for big business opportunities all the time, the way that a manager would be. A lot of the businessy stuff I do has to do with just being in clubs at night. I go out, I meet people, I say, hey. That's been, for me, the most effective business tool, is just my personality, which is sort of the opposite of, there's some joke about what do bass players use for birth control, their personalities. The opposite of that is, like Norah Jones, for example. It's not that I had a manager and she had a manager and our managers had lunch and got us together. I met Norah Jones in a bar. We had a friend in common. Our friend said, hey, you guys should meet. You might have something in common. We talked about music. I wrote my number down on a scrap of paper. I gave it to her, and she called me. what I said about touring and being the kind of person that you'd want to be stuck on a bus with or in a van with, I think you need to be that kind of person all the time when you're out meeting people. Be the kind of person that you'd want to hire if you were a band leader. Think about putting yourself out there that way. Be the kind of person that you'd want to hire, that you'd want to fall in love with as a band leader. Having a manager can be great. I think things are changing now with the internet. You know, there's a lot of, you can make opportunities for yourself that you couldn't do 5 years ago. You can put yourself in places that you couldn't do 5 years ago. It doesn't necessarily take the place of a manager or a booking agent, but most of the musicians that I know are doing more and more themselves. Somebody just sent me this incredible looking email that was sort of a press release about this tour she was doing. And I presumed it had been done by a professional. It looked really slick. It was well laid out. And at the same time, it loaded really quickly. Even though there was graphics, like this thing came up, it wasn't this 10 megabyte email. I used to get those when people were first using the internet to promote their shows. People would like scan their posters and send you these giant emails that would clog up your inbox. You know, be smart, be graphic. Everybody needs to learn how to do a little bit of everything by yourself. Maybe you make your own t-shirts. Maybe, you know, or whatever your merchandise is. You need to learn enough about merchandising to either do it yourself or find some way to have somebody else do it affordably. You need to either book your gigs yourself or, again, find somebody who can do it affordably. What I've heard so many musicians say is like, oh, you know, I don't want to book myself, or I'm shy, or I'm too focused on the music, or, you know, that's somebody else's job. Well, it might be somebody else's job, but right now you don't have that somebody. So do it yourself or find somebody who can do it. But the gigs aren't going to book themselves. The opportunities aren't going to make themselves happen. Any more than the songs are going to write themselves. You can leave a piece of music paper and a pen on the piano all day and all night, and the song's not going to write itself. You have to be self-motivated, and you have to just keep pushing it out there. Teaching has been a great part of what I'm doing. From early on, I always felt like if I learned something, that I wanted to teach it to somebody else. I never was like keeping all the secret stuff I learned to myself. I think it's really fun, even when I started, and it was just something as basic as, hey, I learned this lick. Hey, you want to learn it? Okay. And over time, that's become more of a professional thing. I lived in San Francisco from '89 to '95, and for most of that time, I taught at a music school there called the Blue Bear School of Music, and that was a fantastic experience. You know, for one thing, a lot of what you know as an artist, you might not know that you know it. You just sort of take it for granted, like, as, oh, yeah, that's that thing. But when you have people coming in all the time saying, hey, can you show me that thing? I don't know how to do it. It really makes you take stock of what you know and maybe what you don't know and what your strengths are. And that's helpful to any artist, to have somebody kind of like just poking you a little bit, like, what is that? And then I taught for a number of years in the summertime at this thing in Connecticut called the National Guitar Summer Workshop. And same kind of thing, but more in a group setting. So instead of having one person in a room with a guitar, you'd have 10 people or 20 or 50 people asking good questions. And, you know, having other musicians ask good questions, whether they're beginners or your peers or advanced, that's always good. And I still actually take guitar lessons. Like once a year or so, I try and find somebody who's onto something that I don't know, and just sit with them. And I don't ask for any favors. I pay them for their time just like anybody else would. And I think teaching and learning, it never ends. So I love teaching. I learned from my grandfather, who I've mentioned a lot of times today, and from other guitar players. And I'm always wanting to turn that back around. It seems now that teaching has more to do with the kind of things we're talking about today, about the business, about songwriting, about working professionally. I'm having less opportunities where people just want to learn what scale to play over D minor 7 flat 5, which is what I did a lot of in, 10 10 years ago, people wanted to learn those things. And that's what I was interested in. And now the things I'm more interested in, I'm able to teach those things. And I always learn from teaching. I'd say put yourself out there unashamedly. The number one thing is get out of the practice room, because nobody in the practice room is going to hire you for a gig. It's great to practice, get good, get to be professional level. But 9 out of 10 times I've been hired for personal reasons rather than somebody heard me play a hot lick and they wanted to have that hot lick in their band. So that would be my core advice, is get out of the practice room and go meet people, go to other people's gigs, see what other people are doing, meet them, say hello. If you have a CD, be willing to give them one, or if you have a show, be willing to tell them about it. We see this all the time. If you go to clubs, there's always somebody passing out their CD or their flyers, and maybe that might seem embarrassing or pushy, but the more you can get out there, that's where the gigs are, is they're not in the practice room. And at the same time, book your own gigs. Be a working musician, wherever that is. Get yourself a gig. And if you don't know how to do it, find out how other people do it, hang out with them. Or again, just be unashamedly forward and call up every place you can and get yourself a gig. The practice room and the woodshed, or whatever you want to call it, there are no gigs in there. Nobody's going to pay you to practice. If they do, take them up on it, because that's a good gig. But the main thing is, don't wait for your career to start tomorrow or next week or next year. Start your career today, and that means playing gigs, playing with other people, meeting other people. That's what your career is. Your career isn't scales and modes and chords. Your career is people skills, business skills, professionalism, and if you have those skills, you can have a lifetime of music. And if you don't have those skills, it gets harder to develop them later on. So if you find yourself in your 40s and 50s and you have great music skills and no business skills, it's really hard to start there. But if you find yourself 40 or 50 and you have great business skills, great personal skills, there's always time to work on the musical stuff if you need to, or you can find something else to do with those business skills or those personal skills.